Okay, welcome back. Next. So these are the reasons for loanable funds. Okay, the main ones, the biggest one in this country is homes, but firms also borrow for new equipment, new factories. So here is the demand, what the demand curve looks like. Once again, look at the axes. You're looking at interest rate and the quantity of funds in billions of dollars. So it's a negative relationship. Okay. If interest is down, people will demand more. If interest is up, people will demand less. And so the two come into equilibrium. And it meets at a point here. In this example, at 5% and $60 billion. Okay, so this is an example of what happens when there's tax incentives. Okay, you can also argue that it's going to shift demand, but for the most part, tax incentives cause people to increase their supply of loanable funds. Okay, they're given an incentive to increase their savings, and this increase in supply will lower tax rates for everybody else. Okay, generally when this happens, what they're doing is they're wanting households to save more, and that will improve the interest rate for businesses, and therefore there will be more increase in capital projects, which will lead to a four-letter word that begins with J. And I'll let you figure out what the other letters are. Oh yeah, it's jobs. Okay, here's another one, and it is what's happening if there's a tax credit. Okay, so if there's an investment tax credit, okay, that's going to drive the demand for loanable funds up. Okay, and therefore that means by giving a tax credit and making it easier to borrow funds, demand will go up. That will drive the interest rate up, but it will also drive the demand up. Okay, so read this and pause it and look and try to see what you think you would do in each of these examples. Okay, so here's what happens with a budget deficit. Okay, if there is a budget deficit, we have less of the supplies, okay, there's less national savings, and that reduces the supply of loanable funds. Okay, internationally, what's going to happen is it will probably increase our demand for loanable funds internationally. But for this chapter, we're only looking at what happens in the domestic market. So there will be less money available to borrow, and the interest rate on the money borrowed will be greater. Okay, and now the Mankiw does a poor job of showing crowding out, but crowding out is an interesting phenomenon, and that is the biggest borrower in the world is the United States government. Okay, so if the United States government is borrowing significantly to finance its deficit or to for government spending, it's called crowding out, and what that means is private firms. The private sector gets crowded out because the government is spending so much, okay, is borrowing so much that there is less available for them. By the government spending more, okay, they are increasing the interest rate because demand is going up. Here's supply, here's demand, okay, and demand is going up here, okay, and so since the interest rate is going from this point to this point, there's certain private businesses who are interested in borrowing at this amount but are not interested in borrowing at that amount. Okay, that phenomenon, which is actually the gap from, we'll call this point A, point B, and point C. This gap from C to B is what's called crowding out. Okay, this gap right here is crowding out. It's the number of private investments, okay, and private loans that are not taken because the government borrowing has driven the interest rate up. So all of this is right in the news right now. Actually, it's been in the news for the last several years. Okay, usually we take out more debt during wartime, okay, and fall during peace times, but then in the 80s this all stopped because we wanted more of a larger government. So here is what percent of GDP is debt, okay, from 1970 to 2007. So as you'll see, okay, it peaked during wars, okay, peaked incredibly high during World War I, okay, but then in the 80s, we saw this in the early 90s, okay, we began to see this, and now it's even higher. Okay, so this is a new phenomenon, something that's very hotly debated and that your generation is going to need to figure out. Okay, and summary. Remember this identity. Remember this. Okay, this is important. This is important, and understand crowding out. Thank you. And please like me on YouTube.